I've watched so many business owners dealing with constant financial stress because they don't know how to manage money. And I want to share a method that can help. I've been running this system for the last 23 years through all aspects of my life, including my business, and it has literally turned my life around. It has lifted me from poverty, allowed me to hit key financial goals, and continued to give me peace of mind till this day. By the end of this video, you'll have a money system simple enough to set up today that will change your relationship with money and possibly also change your life. To see how exactly this changed my life, let me tell you my story. I grew up poor in a single mom family, and no one in my family, including my extended family, had any concept on how to manage money, let alone how to run a business. It didn't start out this way because my mother, in her youth, actually made a pretty decent living as a musician, but our financial situation continuously worsened, one bad decision after another. So when I was 15, I moved out, and there I was 1.5 years away from my O-levels, pretending to be normal, but secretly I was worried about money all the time. And even though my major expenses like rent and school fees were covered by scholarship, financial assistance, and the support of some really genuinely good and kind people, I had to cover everything else through odd jobs after school. And there weren't many options for a 15-year-old. Every day was a battle. I would buy a small lunch in school and save half of it for dinner and try to take as few bus rides as possible because I didn't know whether I could afford food and bus fees in the same week. I didn't dare to see the doctor when I was sick, even when I had the money in my bank account, because I felt guilty about spending the money and I didn't know what I might need later. By the time I was 16, I was so traumatized and fed up with my constantly penny counting and feeling unsafe with money all the time that I had to do something about it. I went to the library and binge read every book on personal finance I could lay hands on. I needed to find a system that would help me feel in control of whatever little money I had. After some experimentation, I settled on what you probably know as the envelope method. The envelope method, in a nutshell, is splitting our income into different actual envelopes for different purposes. So, for example, you have a groceries envelope, and every time you go to the supermarket, you will only take this envelope with you and spend the cash that is available in there. Instead of putting cash in actual envelopes, I adapted this into a digitized version. It was a simple Excel sheet with 5 categories, with a budget at the top. And every time an expense occurs, I recorded it, and the amount is then subtracted away from the corresponding category. What this method does is that it gives me a very clear idea of where I am with my finances at any moment in time. I know exactly how much I'm allowed to spend in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, and on what items. For example, at the beginning, I gave myself a budget of $150 for food for the whole month. This roughly equates to $5 per day. And I know this sounds very little, but this was 24 years ago. So it's not that bad. And I knew that as long as my meals didn't exceed that each day, I was within budget. And if I was able to consistently keep under this $5 threshold for a few days, I could even afford eating out with friends for the next meal. It also pushed me to be really creative and to learn lots of skills along the way. For example, for junior college prom, I gave myself $50 for makeup, hair, outfit, and entrance tickets. And of course, this was not enough to get a proper dress or get my hair and makeup done professionally, but I still managed to pull something decent off by learning how to DIY with books and YouTube. And this is a lifelong skill. And because my budgets are fixed over longer periods of time, and I refer to these budgets only instead of to my bank account, I hardly ever get distracted by income increases or bank balance increases. Over the last 14 years, I've only increased my discretionary budget once, and it has stayed the same for the past 10 years. Lifestyle inflation is not really a thing for me. I stopped weighing every single expense against a bigger financial goal, and I have definitely stopped feeling guilty all the time because saving happens for me automatically, and I know I am free to spend my allocated money without affecting my savings goals. Did this method make me rich overnight? No, but what it gave me was invaluable. It gave me a peace of mind. When you are not feeling chaotic about money all the time, you free up so much brain power to do things that are productive in your life. You feel relief, you feel secure, and you're free to be creative and loving and exploring. I'm not saying that your life is going to be stress-free, but your life will be so much less stressful. And it's the same for business. For most of us small business owners out there, our personal finances and the business finances are so intertwined that this method can bring clarity to both. I don't worry about having enough money in the bank to pay my tax bills, for example. I don't worry about not keeping up with business critical subscriptions. I don't have stressful end-of-month accounting frenzies trying to find cash to meet my commitments. And coincidentally, a few months ago, I came across this book, Profit First, by Mike Michalowicz. And I mentioned this in a past video as well. I know this book was written in 2014, but I'm a late comer to the party. The Profit First method is essentially also a permutation of the envelope method. And when I read in the book that Mike's method helped hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, I was blown away. Because I've ran my version of this for so long now that it's almost second nature, and it hadn't occurred to me that I could help anyone with this until I've read his book. Granted, his methods and my methods are not exactly the same, but if anything, he has inspired me to share my experience and learning so that I can help people, especially small business owners like you. I started the first iteration of the system when I was 16, and that was 23 years ago. And of course, over the years, technology advanced and my spending pattern also changed. I've refined this method to make it even more simple. For one, I found that recording every expense was taking up way too much time, and it also didn't really add much value once my consumption pattern has stabilized. So instead of using an Excel sheet to represent different envelopes, I opened different bank accounts. And these are the accounts that I still use to this day. Now I have the income plus personal necessities in one account. This is my main account where income flows in, but this is also where I pay for things that support my basic survival needs, such as insurance, medication, menstrual products, and most basic form of transport to work. Next, I have debt repayment/investments account. When this first started, this was for my student loan payment, but over time, as I completed my loan payments, this is then repurposed into investments. Then I have household necessities account. These are the things that the household need to run, such as rent or / mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, shared subscriptions, furniture and appliances, cleaning services, and also the medical bills for our pets. This is an account that I share with my husband. And I also have the monthly spending account or / fun stuff account. These are expenses that are discretionary and they make life enjoyable, such as eating out, entertainment, clothes, taxi, non-essential gadgets, fun subscriptions like Spotify, and the gym. Last but not least, we have the vacation account. These are high-ticket purchases specifically for traveling, such as flight, train tickets for holidays, accommodation, sightseeing expenses like entrance tickets. The way this works is that I have set up automatic transfers from my main account to these other accounts. The account that I use on a day-to-day basis is my monthly spending account. This has been fixed at 600 euros for probably the last 12 years. And through inflation and all, With mobile banking, I can see at any point in time how much money I still have left in my spending account. I very rarely exceed the 600 euros that I set for myself. And if there's anything left at the end of the month, I just transfer the remainder back to my main account. So the balance at the beginning of each month always restarts with 600 euros. And I came from nothing. After graduating from uni, I had a really normal entry-level job. But still, with this system, I managed to hit some pretty aggressive life goals relatively early. I knew from early on that I really wanted to travel, and I had this goal of going to 30 countries before I turned 30. And at the same time, I also wanted to pay off my student loans, and I also wanted to do a driver's license, which costed a few thousand euros at a time in Germany. And I wanted to do all of these before my 30th birthday. And you guessed it, I hit them all by the time I was 29. So I'm not trying to sell you a rags to riches story. And I'm not saying that you're going to be rich. What I'm trying to say is that you are going to be so much more relaxed about your finances if you use a system like this. Now that I'm a solopreneur, my system evolved again, even though the underlying principles remain the same. I still have all of the personal accounts, but I have a separate set of accounts for my business. In fact, many modern banks allow you to have sub-accounts within one bank account, and that is what I have at the moment. Operating account. This is where I receive payments and where I make payments from. Profit account. Each time I receive revenue into my operating account, a portion of this is then transferred immediately into this account. Tax reserve. A portion is also transferred directly away from my operating account into my tax reserve every time I receive an income, and it is parked there until I needed to pay taxes. For my own owner's compensation, I just transfer the money directly into my personal income account. Another key difference between my business money system versus my personal one is that instead of transferring fixed amounts into the sub-accounts, the amounts are determined based on percentages. And this is because the income is variable. I found it a little bit tricky to get this percentage right for my tax reserve account because taxes are variable and it is applied on your profit, not revenue. So to come to this number, I have to make several assumptions about my expenses and income size. Currently, I set aside 15% of revenue, but this is a very rough ballpark and I will evaluate it on a regular basis. All in all, my setup at the moment is really simple. But of course, as the business evolves, I can see myself opening other sub-accounts for different purposes. Something that I've been thinking about is to have a separate personal development account, specifically for things like courses, books, etc. But this is what I've started with, and I'm very happy with it so far. The point of this video is not to convince you to use my exact setup, but rather to talk about the idea behind it, which is to separate money by purpose before you spend it, instead of having them all sitting in one big pot. This system, together with my AI bookkeeper agent, definitely gave me a lot of relief right from the beginning. And yes, I've created my own AI bookkeeper agent that helps me with expense filing and monthly statements. So if you're interested, I can create a video about them in the future. Subscribe. At this point, you might be thinking, this sounds really interesting. How do I start applying the system to my own life? This system is so straightforward. You can start implementing it today, right now. Essentially, there are only 3 steps. First, decide which envelope or accounts you want to have. Second, decide how much money you should be putting into each account, at which interval. And third, setting up the system. That's it. For the account structure, if you really have no idea and just want something to start with, I'm putting an overview of my setup here once again so that you can take a screenshot and use it as reference. Some quick ideas on how you can adapt this. If you have children, you might want to have a separate account for school-related expenses. If you're managing money for multiple people in your household, such as your partners or your parents, you should categorize the spending separately as well. And here is my business setup. For the business setup, I've also created a one-page cheat sheet on the different accounts that Mike recommended in his book, Profit First. It is more elaborate than my setup, but if your business is bigger and more established, then his setup would probably make more sense for you. Okay, so the next logical question is, how much money should I actually be transferring into each of these accounts and in which interval, right? So to help you work out the exact amount, I have condensed my experience into this formula. The right amount is the baseline plus expectation plus goal. What this means is that the right amount is a combination of how much you're spending at the moment, plus how much you're expecting to spend, and then you adjust this based on how much you would rather spend. And you do this for each of the categories that you have defined for yourself earlier. The quickest way to get a baseline number is through your bank statements from the last 12 months. If you don't have any digital records, record your expenses for at least 2 months and then extrapolate that for the whole year. Or make an educated guess. Now, you can also get Claude or ChatGPT to help with the classification. The next thing to factor in is your expectation of the near future. This could be a rent increase. It could be a new baby that is, baking in an oven. Sometimes it could also be an expectation of a job change or income fluctuations, and you ought to be more conservative in your spending. Make sure you factor them in so that you don't get caught off guard. Last but not least is to factor in your goals. For example, if you realize that you've spent €1,000 a month for your spending account and you think this is overboard and you want to rein this in, then you've got to adjust your numbers based on that as well. But you have to make sure that this is a realistic number, because if you've been spending €1,000 consistently and you've got a goal to cut €700 without any clear idea of how you're going to achieve that, you're setting yourself up to fail. Another example of goals could be finally taking your family overseas for a vacation. Do some research on how much that would cost and budget for that in its own special purpose account. As for when to transfer money, the default is whenever money comes in. Here in Germany, most people receive salaries on a monthly basis at the end of the month, so a transfer every month would make sense. But I know in the US, people seem to get paid on a bi-weekly basis, so you can adjust accordingly. In my case, the only exception I have is my vacation account. Here, I transfer a lump sum at the beginning of the year for the whole year, because flight and hotel bookings don't happen on a regular interval, but you should decide based on what your needs are. For business systems, the mechanism is the same. Baseline plus expectation plus goal. Instead of personal banking statements, you should refer to income statements. And if you're like me and you don't have a lot of history to establish a baseline, you gotta make a decision based on assumptions of your income and expenses. What you want to get to is a percentage number based on revenue for each of your defined accounts. Now that you have decided on what accounts you're gonna have and how much money to put in them and when, the last step is simply to set up the system. There are 3 things to do here. First, open the accounts. You might already have several bank accounts that you can repurpose. You might also already have an account with some banks that allows you to have several pockets or sub-accounts. And if that is the case, this takes 2 minutes. The second thing is to set up transfer rules to automatically transfer the amounts to different accounts at your defined intervals. In Germany, where I am, these automatic transfers or Daueraufträge have to be fixed amounts. So for my business system, since it is a percentage amount, I have to do this manually on a monthly basis. Third, point your payments to the right accounts. You might need to manually go to your different subscriptions and then change the payment method, but this shouldn't take more than an hour. And that's it. You're good to go. I sincerely hope that you found this video useful and that the method that has accompanied me for the last 23 years will also be useful to you. If you're currently struggling with your business finances and you suspect that your successful business might actually be making you worse off than before, check out this video where I talk about unaccounted costs and broken business models that might be hiding behind the accounting chaos. See you next time and 頑張ってね!